We hold the world ransom for $100 billion.
We're gonna play football. Yippee!
You're listening to The Review on the OSG Podcasting Network.
Thanks for the intro, Tommy Palmer, and welcome back, everybody. This is The Review. It's college football on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. Life kind of got in the way. We had a week last week, but we're back and better than ever. This week it is me, OSG Phil, John, OSG Nelson. I almost said OSG John. I don't know why I keep...
I don't know either.
Help me. And we are the online sports guys. Life has also gotten in the way with Brother Wilkie at JWilkerson16. He is off taking care of business and will hopefully catch up with us again next week. It's the quiet time in college football, John.
No such thing.
There's not tons of stuff to talk about, but there's always something to talk about. And this week, I want to start the show by talking about something that I came across last week that just seemed kind of fascinating to me, and it's a pretty big Pandora's box.
Okay.
The Congress is putting out what I guess is a bill, a proposed federal law, if you will, trying to figure out a way to limit or control the salaries of college coaches and the costs, expenditures, money flowing in and out of college football.
Okay.
It's called the CACIA Act, which would be caca for you and me, or CACIA, or CACIA, if you're reading the acronym, of 2019, and it's sponsored by an interesting person.
Tell them who it is, Don Pardo.
Thanks, John. That person would be current House Representative Donna Shalala of Florida. And if the name sounds familiar, there's a reason. She was the former provost or president of the University of Miami. And before that, held the same role at the University of Wisconsin.
But before that,
she was
Health and Human I think she was HHS, wasn't she?
She was the Health and Human Service Director under President Clinton. The bill that was introduced last month would establish a committee to investigate the relationship between institutions of higher learning and intercollegiate athletic programs.
Okay.
I'll start by asking you this.
What in the wide world of sports is going on here?
Should Congress even be sticking their nose in the college?
No. End of question. Next question.
So you're saying the sport doesn't need regulation?
I'm not saying that. Not saying that.
Okay, and what are you saying?
I'm saying that in this particular instance, let the market dictate itself. When you have institutions of higher learning, then they, in theory, have their own budgets and they have their own ways to sit there and pay for things. A lot of times you're seeing independent organizations, especially here in the Southeast, who are the ones who are in control of athletic budgets. It's not necessarily something that's tied directly to a university budget year in and year out. You're having employees with pieces of their work, telephones, what have you, that are paid for by athletic associations and not by the university themselves. These institutions who have figured out the notion of doing things independently of a budget from a school of higher learning are the ones who are ahead of the curve when it comes to paying for things in an athletic sense. When you have institutions who are tied to the monies that are given to them by the state or by tuition and then appropriated and split and spliced and turned into athletic budgets, those are the ones that I think have yet to figure out how to build the better mousetrap. I think that when you see things where athletic associations are paying people 7 or 8 figures, that's because of the revenue that they're bringing in. I don't think it's necessarily something that's immediately tied to the institution itself. Once you have when you have athletic programs who can separate themselves from the universities and consider themselves independent entities, those are the ones I think that are learning how to handle all of these expenditures and are operating at profits. And then also you have, and I think that you and I were discussing off air, the notion of places like a UCLA who are operating at an 8-figure deficit, and that's a you problem. And once again, you're trying to outspend other institutions in the Pac-12. The monies that the Pac-12 is getting through all of their football television contracts and media contracts and everything else doesn't quite match the SEC, the ACC, what have you, and the Big Ten. So I think that you'd like to think that this is a wake-up call, but I personally would like to see institutions figure it out for themselves. And if it gets to a point to where you can't pay your own bills, then you got to take a hard look at what sports you actually have in-house, how you pay for them. Is your athletic department too big? And should you come up with other revenue sources to figure out how you want to pay for things?
But that brings up a whole slew of other questions, among those being, if you're trying to have a program that plays in a Power 5 conference and compete for not only a conference title, but in theory, the college football playoff, which is somewhat of the holy grail, you're talking about a huge disparity.
Yeah.
And that we're seeing the same teams come up year in and year out now with the college football playoff. I could sit here today and tell you that Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Ohio State, maybe Oklahoma, maybe a Michigan or somebody like that, or a Penn State. Those are going to be the team, or an LSU. Those are your 8 or so teams that have a chance of competing for that 4-team college football playoff, because they got the biggest budgets.
Yeah.
They have the most money to spend, and they spend it. They spend it on unpaid coaches who are technical advisors, on sports psychology, sports psychologists coming in and talking to the players,
right,
by analytical departments that the other schools can't afford. And by building these $100 and $150 million palaces to excess.
Right.
I just heard this week that Nebraska, of all schools, is building a new $160 million all-encapsulating athletic facility that's going to house football program, along with a weight room, indoor practice facility, and coaches' offices and everything else you think of. I don't know if it has a lazy river or an indoor trampoline or whatever it is that they do for kicks over there. Yeah. But
what you're maximizing, I think what you're doing is you're maximizing revenue streams. And I think what you're also seeing is the idea of spending money to make money. So I understand where this is coming from. I'm just saying that when it comes to these schools that are operating at these 8-figure deficits, when you have a UConn who is having serious issues, where I want to say the numbers came out and they're available online, but I want to say that you have teams in the MAC and you have teams like UConn who are operating at anywhere from 60 to 70% of the money that is appropriated to them coming from the university itself. Those are the schools I think that need to take hard looks at themselves and how are they not maximizing revenue streams? How are they not maximizing what they have on campus? How are they not trying to figure out really what is important when it comes to the student athlete? I mean, if it gets to the point of trimming sports or dropping down a level, I think it's stuff that has to be considered, especially if you have set yourself up to a way where you're not competitive in Division I and you're still spending worse money after bad money. And I think that is the key here. And I know that when you have someone like Adana Shalala who puts forth something in Congress that sits there and says that there ought to be a committee, first off, to me, that's a waste of time. Because anything blue ribbon, anything committee, anything in that vein, for me, it's a political football that you're sitting there saying, we're making sure that this is an important thing, so we're going to bring in a bunch of our friends and we're going to look at this, which to me is spending.
I got an investigative committee together. Look at what I did. You should
Yeah.
reelect me.
Whoopee. So, good for you. Focus on the task at hand. Figure out what is wrong with these institutions as they continue to spend worse money after bad, and figure out where you can cut that off to where you're not destroying the university on the whole for the sake of having an athletic program that isn't profitable consistently.
It goes back to the old analogy of having eyes that are way the hell bigger than your stomach.
Yeah, no doubt.
When you pull it down. But it brings up some questions that I think are going to have to be answered here in the next few years as
Right.
so many TV contracts and things like that come up. Is the NCAA, is college football broken out the way it needs to be broken out? Do we have a need to have that elite Power 5 program in one level, the group of 5 teams here, an FCS, Division II, Division III, and so on and so forth, and have it be more representative of the teams and what they're able to spend on football without actually bankrupting the university? Because you're talking Power 5 teams, they're not going to bankrupt any university. The SEC had already announced their payouts for the 2019 season, $44.1 million per school.
Good money if you can get it.
And it's only going to go up now that the SEC's TV deal with CBS is ending, and then ESPN is going to likely take it over.
Right.
You're talking about a potential doubling of that amount of money. And there's no way that a Troy or a Georgia Southern or South Alabama or Rice or any school in that level, you just can't compete with that.
No.
You can go line up on a football field and play football against them, but it's like a practice game.
It's a payday for you, and it's a revenue source for them because you're bringing in 85,000 people at, say, $30 a head. So you're looking at what? Revenue on the day of what's 30 times
80 is 240.
Okay, so what, $24 million gross in a day?
That's without concessions.
Yeah, that's 24. What you're doing is.
What would you say you do here?
So then you have 5 other home games, and if you're Georgia, you're looking at a price that's more than $30. So let's just say somewhere between 30 and 100, 130, cut it in half, $60. So $60 a ticket times 90,000. So you're looking at
45 mil.
Yeah, so you're looking at 45 million times 5, which is another $225 million. So 225. So you're looking at roughly, say, what, $250 million gross in just ticket receipts. That does not include what you're looking at when it comes to what you're having to pay to make sure that you can get the seat, your PSL, or whatever you're donating to the school, or whatever you're donating to the athletic association. These schools in these larger conferences will continue to at least maintain some level of, I won't use the word profitability, but what I will use is the way that you can maintain your athletics budgets. And football is going to pay the freight for everything else. It always does. So really what you're looking at here is what I think is going to happen is you're going to have something akin to what we had growing up with the old CFA. You're going to have those 30 or 35 schools being separate and apart from all of the Go 5 or whatever. You're going to have the top 4 or 5 conferences. They're going to do their thing. They're going to get all the big bowl games. Then it's up to the Go 5 to figure out what conferences they want to be in, how they want to line things up. And it's when you get to that separation, that new separation of the new CFA, we'll call it, and then the Go 5 and everybody else down low, it's the Go 5s and everybody else are going to have to take a long, hard look at themselves and figure out their own accountability and their own profitability when it comes to the economics of sport.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about overall, the king of revenue right now, Texas A&M, who's raking in somewhere around $148 million of revenue per season.
Yeah.
That's not even including the peripheral stuff.
Yeah. Well, and when you expand your stadium, and it's now, I think, at 100 and it's north of 100,000. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at, say, $60 a ticket. times 6, 300, and so you're looking at 600,000 times $60. So that's not bad.
Yeah. And the smaller schools just can't compete with that.
No, and they
I
should.
mean, the majority of schools from the MAC to the Mountain West and all the smaller conferences there, you're talking about schools that have 30, maybe 40,000 seats in their stadium. If my memory serves, the NCAA requires the Division I program to have a facility that holds at least 30,000 people.
I think that's right. Yeah.
But even then, they're not selling that out.
No.
And you're talking about a business model that works great for some teams, but for other teams, there's no way it could ever work.
But they always are going to see that shiny object, and they think that they can get to that level and compete. I mean, the discussions we've had about a school like Kansas, where Kansas right now, horrible on the football field, leading into bringing in Les Miles, but the level of their investment is what they're going to have to take a look at over the next couple of years, where they're looking at all the capital improvements. They're going to try to rebuild things. They want to fix the stadium, but you bring in Les Miles, you bring in his staff, all of these intangibles. Kansas is going to have to take a long, hard look at themselves if they're going to try to be anything more than just a 500 mediocre football school and a basketball school.
And that I think that's kind of where we're going here, in that even a team like Kansas, who makes a lot of money off of basketball and is technically in a Power 5 conference,
Yeah,
even they can't compete with the Oklahomas or Texases of the Big 12. They just don't have the resources, and they probably never will. And which means you're talking about a college football world, realistically, where you've got maybe 18, 20 teams that can play at one level. And then you've got, there are 130 teams in the football bowl subdivision. And out of those 130 teams, roughly 100 to 110 of them have zero chance of winning a national title before they play the first play of the first game of any season.
Yeah.
And it's a problem, and it's only going to be a problem that gets worse, because how do you keep outside of the draw, the common fan who says, I see a big name, Alabama, I must watch this, even though I'm not a college football fan. How do you keep your alumni happy? How do you keep your students happy? How do you keep everybody happy when you're throwing all this money at something that you can't? You're throwing money at a problem that the money's not going to fix.
I think the larger question is, when it comes to these schools, figure out your place. You do you, whatever that entails. And I mean, do a realistic you. Don't sit there and, don't be that person that thinks that you've got to go to the store and you've got to wear the shiniest jewelry. You've got to have the Oleg Cassinis. You've got to have the biggest house on the big side of town, and you can't afford it, because it doesn't do you any good, doesn't do your school any good, doesn't do those student athletes any favors either. If you sit there and you can't pay for the biggest house on the biggest side of town, all that means is there's going to be a for sale sign out there sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I see it on my alumni at Georgia Southern. I see it on their message boards, on their Facebook groups. I see the fans, the alumni sitting there whining, crying, cursing, anything you can kind of think of, thinking, well, we just got to do what we did back in the football in the FCS, which is the old Division I AA. And if we do that, we're going to start winning championships. And honestly, no, we're not. That's going to happen. The days of that are gone. And do we have to change what's been the system that's been in place for ever and ever and ever, and the way the NCAA is in college football has always gone about its business, having these certain tiers of teams, even though those tiers might encompass a really, really wide, broad variety of schools with different revenue and different sources of income and to pay their bills. Do we need to find some sort of criteria like that to divide out who's playing in what level and who's competing for what title? Maybe that's our solution.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think it goes back to the old CFA days. I think that when you had the CFA who negotiated their own independent television contract, that was what was going on with ABC, and everybody else was set to negotiate their own deals with their own local syndicators or local networks or whatever, and then you lived within your own means. And I think that outside of the Big Five or the Power Five conferences, you are going to have schools. You're going to have to look at themselves in the mirror and sit there and go, okay, what is that moment when we're living beyond our means and we have to stop? And then where do we go from here? It's like I said, do you, but do a smart version of you. Don't try to be like everybody else because you can't get there. And, no offense, Phil, I thought that when Georgia Southern decided that they wanted to move up from Division I AA to Division I, I thought that it was not the smartest move because you were dominant in Division I AA. You were a dominant school in FCS, yet you saw the shiny object and thought that you needed to go to the Sun Belt.
I agree wholeheartedly. There may be a little bit of difference in the revenues that were coming in, but the money that's going out is more than cancels that out, in my opinion. I'm realistic. I'm not necessarily like all of the alumni, but I'm realistic enough to know that the target, the goal, the ability to win games is basically, if we can win the Sun Belt and get to a mid-December bowl game, I'm good.
Yeah.
It's a successful season. That's where the bar is, and that's probably where the bar is always going to be with things currently being where they are.
Yeah.
So we wrap things up here on the first block of the show. We've talked about a lot here, and really, realistically, this thing that's going to change in the next couple of years, but it may change over the course of down the road.
Something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. An interesting topic, one that really intrigues me and I follow a lot because I'm curious to see if how this is going to evolve. But when we come back in the second block, we're going to talk about something else that's been a change in the way college football has done business, and that's the transfer portal. And a proposal by the Big Ten that has gotten some people's interest and others who look at it and say, why would you do that? That and more when we come back in the second block of the review. You are listening to the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
The online sports guys would love to hear from you. Go to our Twitter page at OSG Sports for a comment, rant, or just whatever's on your mind about college football.
Soccer Down Here is sponsored by Apolinski and Associates, LLC, personal injury lawyers with over 30 years of experience. Call Steve Apolinski at 518-350-4231 or email him at steve@aa-legal.com if you need help with a wrongful death or serious injury matter. Steve Apolinski is rated one of the top 100 trial attorneys in Georgia, recognized as Legal Elite by Georgia Trend magazine for being one of the most effective lawyers in Georgia.
If you want to scale a mountain, buy boots. If you want to turn your crush into something more, say hi. At Country Financial, we know protecting the things you love and preparing for tomorrow start with simple steps. So we help you take small steps today with insurance and financial services that can have a big impact on your family's future.
For all your home, auto, and life insurance needs, call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871.
Welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out. Welcome back.
Thanks for sticking around, everybody. You are listening to the review here on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. This is the college football part of our network. We have Soccer Channel. We have the third channel, which is all others. So you got three options. Go to the OSG Sports app. Look for us on Spreaker. You could find us under college football, soccer, and OSG Sports in general. Social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter like everybody else at OSG Sports. He, of course, is OSG Nelson. I am OSG Phil. We are two of many of the online sports guys. You can find our website at theonlinesportsguys.com. We love to talk sports, and in this case, we're talking college football. John, the first half of the show, we talked about a proposal to limit the amount of money schools can make. On the heels of that, I want to ask and talk about a proposal by the Big Ten athletic directors, which in short reads, you can, since the transfer portal had the bad when we started doing it, we're willing to allow you to make one move as a transfer and not get penalized and have to sit out a season. But if you want to move again, there's a penalty involved. Good idea, bad idea, indifferent.
A freebie, huh?
A freebie.
You get a freebie. In the grand world of stuff, is a freebie going to matter? That's, UConn has had 24 kids leave their program. You think that freebie is going to matter to anybody who wants to go play football at Stores? I mean, sir, this is kind of what I'm getting at here, because you have kids who leave schools, various numbers and various levels every single year. And I know that it's kind of the extreme case when we're talking about what Randy Edsall is or isn't doing at UConn. But when you have 24 student athletes leave a school in a year, in the grand scheme of things, do you honestly think that off the top freebie is going to make a tinker's damn worth of difference?
Probably not, but at the same, particularly in light of the fact that the transfer portal seems to be favoring the powerful teams, like pretty much everything else does, and for guys with legitimate reasons, be it family, medical, or personal, to actually move closer to home, they seem to be the ones who haven't been able to actually transfer.
Yeah. So, I see your point in that regard.
About a world where college coaches kind of come and go at the whim of who's holding the purse strings.
Yeah.
If a contract is only good for a college coach until the next best deal comes along, and if they pick up and leave, they pay a little bit of money for their buyout clause and they move on. And then the kid who was recruited by said coach and came to said university because of that coach, without the opportunity to at least transfer once, they're stuck there. They don't.
Then do this. Do this. In the language of portaling, I would put it this way: if a coach who has recruited you as a student athlete leaves the institution before you start to come onto campus and play a game, which buys you some time, because if you come in December, if you declare during the December National Signing Day, and that's coming up, we can talk about that next week. But if you declare and you show up in December and you start enrolling in January and you're taking classes and your head coach decides, peace out, I'm jetting, somebody else is going to pay me twice as much, I'm leaving, I think that you ought to get that freebie anyway. I think that needs to be written into the bylaws. If your coach leaves that recruited you, then you can go as well. You're not stuck there, because 9 times out of 10, the new coach has a different philosophy about who he wants, the kind of student athlete he wants, and the kind of offense, defense, special teams that he wants anyway. So I think that that's the key here. I think that you wouldn't necessarily need that freebie as much if you wrote that into the language of when it comes to portaling. I think that the NCAA, when it looks at specific student athletes who really are the ones that need to be the transfers for student hardship, family issues, what have you, I think that the freebie could work in that regard, especially the case of Virginia Tech, which we talked about ad infinitum, ad nauseum, basically, in both. But I see where the freebie could work. I just think that you need to be wiser about how you write in the language of portaling.
Absolutely. I think the proposal was preliminary at this point, and they wanted to get it out there for discussion. Already against it is Oklahoma State quarterback Mike Gundy, who's a man and now over 50.
Yeah.
And Gundy doesn't feel that players should have that ability, even though he might have the ability to leave at any given time.
Yeah. No, sorry, I disagree.
Yeah, and that's where my problem comes in. His concern is the players sign a commitment, and it's like signing a contract if you're a professional that you should be honored.
Okay. So a coach who signs a contract then decides to do something else and sign a contract someplace else, not where he's currently employed, he can go because he's an adult. But the student athlete who he brings in for the university that he was previously employed at is the one that is stuck holding the bill after the coach leaves the table and doesn't pay for the meal. That makes a lot of sense. Sorry, disagree.
Yeah, very hypocritical, and it's the Pac-12 also has had some reservations about it, but quite honestly, right now, Pac-12 should be open to pretty much anything that anybody throws out there because they need something to equal to kind of level the playing field.
Recruit better.
They've struggled in pretty much every aspect of it when it comes to college football and keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. Yeah, and listen, I get it. The free cat is totally at this point, and the high-profile moves have all been quarterbacks, all guys who weren't happy playing where they were, wanted to go somewhere else and get more playing time. I mean, look at it this way: Joe Burrow, Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, 3 of the 4 quarterbacks in the college football playoffs this year all came from other places, all recruited by other people, all landed where they were because they were looking for more playing time, plain and simple.
Yeah, Tate Martell, another example.
And, not even as good an example because he couldn't even win the job.
Jacob Eason. You notice this at the skill positions, but those are the ones that get the most rub.
Yeah, and even at Georgia, Lawrence Cager, who transferred from the University of Miami and became go-to receiver for Jake Fromm before he got injured, improved his draft stock tremendously by going to the University of Georgia. Just like it's being used as an excuse when you're not happy where you are to move yourself someplace where you think you can get the opportunity to have the spotlight shine brighter. This year alone, we've already seen Jamie Newman, who put up almost video game numbers as the quarterback at Wake Forest. But Wake Forest is not going to ever compete for a national title and is not going to get the national spotlight that a University of Georgia does. So what did Jamie Newman do? He made himself a graduate transfer to the University of Georgia. He's probably going to light things up. He fit for what Georgia needs, but it's an example of being able to just, if you need to want to pick up and go, you go. And that now we seem now be living in.
Yeah.
I don't know how you limit or legislate that, considering that you've already said, okay, yeah, you can do it. It's okay for you to do it. Even though you're still, for certain people, well, it's not okay for you to do it. It's either an all or nothing thing, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, but the adults know better in this situation.
Right. If you're going to allow some to do it, you got to allow everybody to do it. And is it going to? Would it create a free agency world in college football?
How different would that be? How different would that be from what we have right now?
It would be a little bit more out in the open. But you're also talking about recruiting violations, people being willing to pay off and offer enticements to get people to come place. You're opening up multiple cans of worms by doing this.
Yeah.
Do I think players should have the ability to leave a school if, like you said, a coach leaves or something happens and they want to be closer to home, or they think they're never going to get an opportunity and they can get an opportunity someplace else? How can you sit there and say, no, you made the commitment as a 17-year-old however many years ago, you're stuck with it. You don't get out of it.
Yeah.
How can you look a kid in the eye and say that?
Very easily, because you're the one making all the money.
Yeah. And that's the whole problem with it. If a kid wants to be a professional football player and that is his life goal, why not give a kid that opportunity to at least get the attention he wants or the coaching he wants or the opportunity that he wants to get himself out in front of people who can next level? It's a tough question. There's not an easy or clear answer for that. But this is all things that have to be considered before you just sit there in your office with a big desk chair and telephone sitting on the desk and say, do this.
I'm the adult. Do this.
How do you do that?
Well, like I said, you're the one with the pocketbook. You're the one getting the paycheck, and you're the one who's trying to look out for the university that you're currently with.
And it goes back a little bit to what we talked about in the first block of the show when we were talking about revenue and money's coming in and the disparity of finances between big school, really, really big football programs and everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
That divide's only going to get bigger over time. And it's not going to go away, and it's not going to be something that's going to resolve itself.
No.
And it's the same thing for the transferring of students leaving one school for another.
Right.
That's never stopped. I love the fact that if you graduated from one school and haven't used up all your eligibility, you can go somewhere else, kind of like Jalen Hurts did, and to some extent what Jamie Newman's doing. I get that.
All for it.
Yeah.
Russell Wilson. Yep. Same thing.
I have no problem with that whatsoever, but where do you draw that line? And that line, right now, the line seems to be moving almost year to year.
Oh, yeah. No doubt. And that's the rub here in all of this. It's where is the line, and who can be the adult in the room and actually be an adult.
Yeah, and the NCAA, for all of its bluster, really doesn't have a whole lot of control over this.
No.
They can sit there and say, we want you to do this. We want you to do this. If you don't do this, it's bad. It's a violation. School doesn't have to sit there and say, okay, well, you said we're bad. We'll stop now.
Yeah, no.
They can say, screw you.
Yeah, we're going to do what's best for us.
Yeah. And the NCAA can't do anything about it. It's already happening now in college basketball. It's a lot to digest, and there's a lot to talk about. And for me, I could go on forever about this, but for some of you, it's probably pretty boring, minutia business type of stuff.
But it's important in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the business of athletics and how it's tied directly to your favorite school.
Exactly. And that's, at the end of the day, at the end of this podcast, that's the point we're trying to make. That's what we're trying to get out there and make people think or be a little bit more conscious of before they just sit there willy-nilly and watch a game and say, that player sucks, he needs to not ever play again, or that coach sucks, he needs to be fired.
Yeah.
Nothing's that simple. Nothing's that clear-cut. And for everything that you do or every decision made like that, there is a repercussion that goes along with it, which may not necessarily be what you think it's going to be.
Nothing like Newtonian physics and college athletics, huh?
Yes. But alas, I get too deep. It's time for a wrap up. Yes. Thanks for sticking around and tuning into this episode of The Review. We are forever grateful for your attention and your time. This is our college football show during the off season. It's our only college football show, but it's our baby. We love to talk about things like what we did today. Yep. And anything else you might be able to think of. Drop us a line via social media. We told you earlier about the Facebook and Twitter pages. You can email us too. The email address, osgsports@gmail.com. Real easy to remember. Everything and anything tied to us starts with OSG Sports, except for soccer down here. That's a whole other conversation.
That's another channel.
For OSG Nelson, I am OSG Phil. We are part of the Online Sports Guys team here on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. Woo!